Hey guys, Thomas the Silly Jr. here, aka Mustached Tom, here to review Godzilla, City of the Edge of Battle. So I saw that this was a Netflix movie, so I decided to check it out, to see some kaiju action. This will be a spoiler review since some stuff happens, but there are some other indications here before I begin the review. One thing I did want to take note before I officially begin my recap is that it does seem like this movie does have something before it, but I'm not sure if that's official or not, because some events in this movie indicate that there were events happening prior to this, and I don't know if that was in a previous movie that's a part of this, or if this is a standalone movie. I'm not really sure. Nonetheless, with that being said, I will get started with the review. So we start off in this space station where, right off the gate, they mention Godzilla. And we do see a brief glimpse at him. Though most of the majority of the movie, we do not see Godzilla actually really doing anything, which has been a complaint in other Godzilla films, is that the extent of which we see Godzilla has been very minimal. Nonetheless, apparently this has been 20,000 years in the making, that being Godzilla has been living for that long, and that it has terrorized the Earth for that amount of time. So the team in the spaceport start to suspect that the Godzilla could potentially spot them even from where they are and potentially even attack, which does lead them to potentially want them, makes them maybe want to leave. We then cut to a man who ends up being our main protagonist for the movie, who I would just call Hairu. I believe that's near his nickname that he's given, but for nonetheless, that is what I will call him. Anyways, he wakes up pretty injured, and in this sort of space suit, or at least part of it, and he does take on the remaining parts of it, only to see a woman with these sort of I want to say tribal tattoos. I'm not necessarily sure if they are necessarily tribal, but that's the best description I could come up with. Who sees him and drops these green beads as she flees into this forest. So he gives chase after her, and she sort of goes around him and starts following him. So he starts moving towards this heat source, and Hirohito, I believe is his full name, but again, I'll just call him Hairu, gets a call from one of his other teammates, Yuko. So the other group, who is followed by Yuko, is under attack by another woman who seems very familiar, has similar tattoo markings, and has a bow and is shooting at them at a distance. Yuko manages to get a shot in after being surrounded, but they see that there are multiple masked women that surround them, and then eventually lead them into this cavern. There, they meet with a larger group of their team that comprised of a professor and a few more other men as well. So they mentioned how they could potentially have the wherewithal to kill this race of people that help them, even though it's a bizarre thing to even consider. Nonetheless, we find out that the commander, our main character, Hairu, does want to just leave at the time being. But nonetheless, they get moved to this giant wall where these twins, I'll call them, the two women we saw at the beginning, are the one that attacked and the one that led Hairu there, are now able to talk to them telepathically. And they're then Hyrule changes his regard into wanting to fight Godzilla. And as we sort of progress through the movie, we get a lot of exposition and science talk, and I do think that the length of these things do bog the movie down a lot. Unfortunately, I do think a lot of this stuff could have been minimized, and I'll get to more of that at the end of the recap part. But nonetheless, we do get to learn about how other creatures are attempting to mimic Godzilla, or take parts of it. And already Hyro is starting to question himself as he is the one in command. He has all the responsibility on his shoulders, and he just doesn't want to fail. So the twins have now the potential to copy their language, the English language, because that's not what they were speaking prior. So we cut to Yuko, who goes on ahead on her own for whatever reason and gets attacked by tentacle monsters. Oh boy, the implications there. Nonetheless, the twins are able to use their arrows, which are able to pierce through these creatures while the group's guns, heroes' group's guns, are very inefficient. Then these dragon-like creatures land down and start attacking, and again, the guns prove to be very not effective, while the bows seem to pierce that. And we get some more mechs that appear, and even more of the team. So there were quite a bit of the team scattered all over the place, it would appear. So we cut back to, very briefly, the team in the sky that says they want to continue to leave, but they do get an emergency call, which kind of leads them to saying, maybe we should stick around and see what's going on. So Hyrule talks to the team about wanting to stay to face off against Godzilla. And they start talking about this nanometal, or as I'll early meme it, nanomachines, essentially. Nonetheless, the twins guide them into this other mine, and again, there's even more exposition about what's just going on and about Godzilla, and then they get attacked some more by more flying dragon creatures. So they move into the city that was constructed out of this nanometal, and it would appear that this is where Mechagodzilla destroyed the city. This part about Mechagodzilla is what made me so curious to see if there was a prior movie, because there was an indication that this Mechagodzilla already fought Godzilla in whatever prior movie it is, and won, but managed to get torn apart in the process. So, the twins leave the army to do their thing, and they start to build off of what the tech is allowing them to do. So they make their way into this Mechagodzilla town, as they refer to it as. And there's even more science talk along the way. So one of the soldiers wants to make the city a weapon against Godzilla. That is their plan. And then from there, Hyro builds a strategy off of that implication in order to defeat them. One of the men speaks about how it might be too risky, well, with everything that they are using being tech-based. While that's going on, the twins and elders of the other community, I wrote down what their name was, Haitua, I believe it's pronounced. The Haitua group, the twins and the elders of that group are praying now to this wall. So, meanwhile, Yoko tests pilot what's called a vulture. She gets used to it rather quickly. And we get a brief moment where we see Haru attacked when he was younger by Godzilla. And outside of that, I'm going to say this now, that what there is to the characters is pretty minimal at best. It feels like they overcompensated for the science and the religion that does come up at some point, which I forgot where it came in, so I didn't write that in my notes, but there is talk of religion, science, and exposition, which seems to take the forefront in this movie. The characters do struggle to be characters, and Haru is sort of your just average, like, oh, I gotta, protect everyone, so I have to become determined for everyone sort of character. But outside of that, again, it was just, I don't feel like there was enough. He does talk about briefly still having the pain, as we saw in the beginning of the movie. But, oh yes, because the religious thing, actually, I did write that. So there is a character that is giving a part of the team this godly sermon. And I refer to him as the sermon guy because I don't recall hearing his name. And he talks about how the nano metal is evil. And he also makes mention that there is a name that is worse than Godzilla, and he whispers it to the main character in secret, but I'll get to that later on. So, meanwhile, the twins start running about outside, within distance of being able to say hero talk with Yuko. And after a little walk and talk, Yuko ends up kissing him. And it was at this moment where it really became clear that there wasn't enough development, because I didn't really understand who Yuko was. At first, there was a brief moment where they were talking earlier, and I thought they were siblings at first, and then they started talking about the stuff that they were talking about, and then she suddenly kisses him, and I'm like, oh, they're not siblings, are they? Otherwise, that would be incest, and ugh. Yeah, so I don't think they're brother and sister. I don't think they would do that. Again, but that is a weak exploration to who Yuko is as a character. I barely knew who she was. I didn't know what her relationship to the main character was. So one man, one of the soldiers, goes into this tube and he allows the metal to cover himself, and two of these other soldiers who look like twins as well, later on explain how this process is natural and how this will help them to defeat Godzilla in the process. But when this starts happening, Godzilla starts to move. And other people are worried that the nano metal is going out of control and just generally eating people. But as I mentioned before, the two twin soldiers talk about how the other guy did that on purpose, and that all of them should do this in order to defeat Godzilla and to build this Mecha Godzilla and become this greater being. And surprisingly enough, Yuko decides to join in their cause. And again, it kind of comes out of nowhere. And I don't feel her explanation was really justified 100%. I mean, again, building up the character more probably would have helped make her decision make sense. But again, it just feels like it comes out of nowhere in this movie. But unfortunately, their cover goes away, and again, Godzilla starts to move in on their location, building up some lightning and striking them, but the buildings do manage to do a little team block. So, in order for them to commit to their strategy, which they explained a little bit earlier, Hyrule decides to sign up as a distraction as one of the vultures and attack Godzilla with Yuko and one of the twin soldiers that I mentioned. So they start attacking, and we cut back to the ship, which now sees that they've been locating these guys and been seeing like, oh, they're fighting Godzilla now, so they start to try to literally see. I can't put it any other way to say that they literally see Godzilla's power level. I'm sorry to use a Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball reference, but there was literally a number on the screen, and they're like, "Holy cow! That number is way bigger than we expected." That is literally a power level, if ever I saw one. But they start to enable Godzilla to move up into this trap point they set up for Godzilla. And they start spreading the nano metal underneath his feet when he gets to that point. And they continue to use the vultures to attack and assault and use this harpoon, which has an EMP, and since he's made of pure lightning, they thought that charging him up with even more EMP would cause him to overload and explode. So they poured on Godzilla, and they continue their firing, and they fire the harpoon, and then Godzilla's temperature starts rising, and they think they have won the war. But there's this moment where they start to doubt themselves, so the other twin soldier, the one that remained at the base, starts to turn himself into a metal, into the Mecha Godzilla. He gives himself into it. Seeing that the Godzilla is gonna still be able to do something. So the rest of the team that's still in the base starts to flee as the base starts to heat up because everything around that area is starting to heat up as well. And Hyrule, seeing the battle not over, continues to attack try to attempt to divert the heat somewhere else. And while that's going on, Hyuko starts getting taken over by the machine, and she's trying to fight it off. And the two twin soldiers are like, we set this up so that this would happen on purpose, and it starts to happen to Hero as well, but he manages to break it off, and I guess there was some sort of implication that since he got that the other group did something to him that he was able to resist. I assume that's the case. I don't know. They never really explained that part. But he manages to save Hyuko from her potential fate. Meanwhile, the religious guy was Medfest. That's what I heard, and that's what I wrote in my notes after way longer than I should have. Starts to talk to him about the potential to just get out of this as soon as possible, and to also destroy that part of the Mechagodzilla part that's controlling them. So Hero's caught between the two sides of either using the Mechagodzilla thing and using the other thing, between the two twin soldiers and the religious guy. And one of them says that in order to defeat Godzilla, they as humans would have to become something far worse than Godzilla in order to defeat him. And that is sort of an interesting concept, even though it's all done through exposition. Nonetheless, Hero chooses the path of harder resistance than that, while one of the twins gets blown up by Hero, and then the other one gets fully taken over by the metal, which then he can no longer talk. So Godzilla rises up and starts to light and blast the rest of the city and starts sinking it. And at a very bizarre moment, the movie actually just ends with Hiro embracing Hyuko, who I assume is just dead now. And that's how the movie ends, with the exception of an after credits sequence. And again, I do feel like the movie, there's something before this I clearly missed out on, or at least it very well feels like it. Um, but before I give my score, I will talk about the after credits sequence. So I earlier mentioned that at some point the religious guy, Medfest or whatever his name was, went up to the guy to talk about something of name worse than Godzilla, and he whispered it, and we as the audience do not hear this when he initially says it. However, when the after credits sequence happens, as we see Hiro holding to Hugo, we relive all the moments where the religious guy was talking to him throughout the movie, and the last thing we see is the same scene replay, but we hear the name that he whispered in Hiro's ear, which is Ghidorah. And for those of you who don't know who Ghidorah is, he is the three-headed Hydra. Or dragon, I forget which it is, but nonetheless, that is what Ghidorah is. And that is Godzilla, City of the Edge of Battle. And as I mentioned, I do believe this movie struggles on its own. I do believe that the characters do lack a lot of personality, and that they carry more, the conflicts and ideals overweigh the actual characterization of who these people are supposed to be, which I don't think is a good thing. I do think that it kind of, the emotional parts just don't have as much impact in that case, and the sort of morality of it all is sort of lost when you're just spouting out two different, clearly, or possibly even three different ideologies, depending on, if you count the group that they run into, the twins and the others, as a different ideology. Then it just becomes in three different spout outs of ideology, rather than characters talking about what beliefs that they hold. And I do believe that really significantly holds this movie back from being something pretty epic. Not to mention, as I mentioned earlier, but Godzilla is barely in the movie as it is. He does only come in near the end, and is only briefly mentioned and shown at the beginning. All the rest of the movie is just the humans interacting with one another, and you would think with that much time spent with the humans, you would think that they would have enough time to build actual character, but no, even that's sort of, again, missing. So, at the end of the day, I do think that this movie is kind of weak, honestly. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. I do think that the ideologies going up against each other is always an interesting topic, but I do think overloading it, so it's like the forefront of what we are seeing, it kind of lends itself to being a bigger weakness than a strength, especially when you lack actual character, actual heart. Because that is one of the things that is briefly discussed in the movie, humanity. They briefly discuss it, but it feels like there is a lack of humanity in the movie that is trying to discuss humanity. I feel like that's kind of ironic in a way, in a bad way, though. So again, I'm going to give it either a 3 or a 4 out of 10, somewhere around there. I don't think this is a good showing for Godzilla. He's definitely struggled in the past, but I did see a trailer for Godzilla King of Monsters in 2019, so hopefully his run shall reign supreme way better than that, but we'll have to wait and see, I guess. But for now, that is my review of Godzilla City of the Edge of Battle. And if you enjoyed my review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out that link in the description. It'll head you over to my Patreon page, and any donations are greatly appreciated. Until next time, everyone, bye-bye.